Okay. Yeah, this is lightly structured, mostly your requests, but we'll go over the biggest stuff first, unless you have specific questions. Let me pull up this final. All right, there's one part. There's what we want. Got the national up. Let me grab the state. What are you guys running into as far as challenges? What are your biggest concerns at the moment? Okay. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, still trying to find mine. Be 1 second. I don't know why it's running away from me. Do you have that question in front of you while I'm still trying to find it? Oh, there it is. I got it. Okay. Go ahead, though. Sorry about that. Finally got it. Which one did you say? Number 10, okay. Okay, I think I've got it here. Number 10, was it the one about, yeah. So, in North Carolina, oral buyer agency, which one did you answer? What was your confusing point? You picked C. Allows the details of the agency agreement to be delayed until written agency occurs. You know, I categorize that kind of question or answer as more of a test-taking skill than a content skill almost. So I don't blame you for the confusion. But let's think about it. Let's recap how the oral buyer agency thing works. What is the difference between oral and written? Forgive the silly question, but bear with me. Yeah, that's it. That's my whole point. The only difference is that it's in writing. You still have to explain everything just as you would in either case, whether you're getting it in writing from them or just agreeing that you're not going to require that yet. You still have to talk about every component, every facet. So, therefore, allows the details of the agency agreement to be delayed? No, you still have to talk about those details. You're just not solidifying them with a written agency agreement. Does that make more sense? They like to test you on that. One example is, what do we do about dual agency? Even though we're in oral buyer agency, do we still have to talk about that and explain how that works? Yeah. You can have oral dual agency explanation while it's still in that oral buyer agency situation. But as soon as you convert the oral buyer agency to written, you got to also convert the dual to written at that same time. So that's sort of kind of, I guess, illustrates the point. The details still have to be expressed. Let's not forget that word, intentionally discussed. They're not delayed until it's in writing. So it's sort of almost semantics. It's like you got to get in the mind of the test writer and think, okay, what are they getting at here? Okay, the details are still talked about. They're just not written up and signed, right? So then it goes back to which of the answer choices are, even at its most basic form, not disprovable, right? Or definitely true. And so the first one must be non-exclusive. That means they can cheat on you. It's not even cheating. You're letting them date around, right? You're letting them, you work with whomever else and you have nothing you can do about it. You're agreeing. You're cool with that. And have no expiration date. In other words, how long can an oral buyer agency agreement last? As long as you're content not making any money, right? Because you won't make any money if all you ever have is an oral buyer agency agreement with someone, because you can't get to the meat of it, like the whole making an offer part, which leads to a closing, a contract and a closing. Yeah. Right. Let's look at the other two though. Cannot include dual agency options. Well, that's just flat opposite. It must include discussion of dual agency as well. And then must be reduced to writing prior to touring properties with the client. Well, that kind of defeats the whole purpose, because we're trying to prove ourselves. We're giving them the chance to kick our tires, test us out. And that part of that is we do everything that the only thing we don't do in that oral buyer agency phase is write the offer, right? Everything else, showing them stuff, helping them understand value. I guess I should say probable sale price, the market. So does that make a difference? Does that help a little bit? Okay. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I know it. And I wish there was a better way. But I think in any sort of standardized testing, there's always going to be that element. And some tests are worse about it than others. And it really comes back to repetitions. And how many times do you have, how much do you have enough time in this course to take enough practice tests to get a good feel for this stuff, just the reps, right? So yeah, it's that. Oh, yeah. I know. Well, let's think about the intention of it. What does it stand for again? Everybody join in. Well, let's think about when it came up in the course. We covered it in chapter 21. And also, well, yeah, you're halfway there. And the last letter, you probably know that too, act. So that S and that P, settlement procedures, closing or settlement procedures. It's the law surrounding what lenders, and was a little bit about us too, what we are and are not allowed to do when it comes to a closing. And mainly it's about money. In fact, I just saw a case, gosh, where was it? It was, I don't remember where they were. It might have been in this state, but just yesterday or something, somebody got in trouble because the mortgage company was basically paying the real estate agent for the agent sending them borrowers. So the agent would work with a buyer. They would send that buyer, suggest that buyer to a certain mortgage company, and in exchange, that mortgage company would pay them and give them like events, parties, gift cards, things of value. That's a RESPA violation. And I believe the mortgage company was in the millions that they had to pay. The real estate company was like a $200,000 fine. It's real. I mean, it's significant, and it still goes on. Just imagine how competitive the market is right now. And yeah, people are paying money for bodies, so to speak, right? Money for actual clients. That's what's not allowed. Now, you could give somebody a nice gift of appreciation, but not directly because you sent Ed Smith to me. It can be, thanks for the year. We've been working great together. Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah, whatever, happy anniversary since we started working together, but it can't be because you sent me this person and this person and this person. That's the main gist of RESPA. The other stuff about RESPA, so that's the stuff related to agents, brokers, no kickbacks between vendors. And we're the hub, right? We're the source of where that client finds most of who they need to work with in a transaction. Inspectors, surveyors, attorneys, lenders, all those people usually come as a suggestion from us. And so imagine how much more money we could make if we got $100 from each of them for that one person. That's a great business model. It's just illegal, right? Because the conflict of interest, right? Then how do they not know that we're sending them to that person because we make the money instead of because that person is a really good vendor that would benefit them? And that's how I explain it to people. So that's the gist of RESPA. The other stuff about RESPA is that the lender, within the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, the lender has to give full disclosure about the loan terms. And they can't hide the fact that, yes, I'm giving you a 6% rate instead of a 7.5% rate, but that's because you got to pay 18 discount points or whatever that would add up to be, right? In the old days, they would hide that little detail in the fine print until closer to closing. And then the buyer's like, wait a minute, I thought you were just giving me a great rate because you were so much better. It's because I'm paying for that great rate with my own money, upfront interest, prepaid interest, lender yield in the form of discount points. So now RESPA also has to do with that loan estimate and the formatting that it's in, right? That loan estimate document. And then also the closing disclosure document, which is pretty much exactly laid out the same as the loan estimate. So there's no mystery. The borrower doesn't have to look around and there's no chance to hide pertinent information from them about the loan. And it lets them compare two different loans more easily, apples to apples. Back in the day, that was one of our jobs as brokers was, let's look at the confusing good faith estimate from lender A and the one from lender B that look totally different and try to make sense of it and deep dive into all the fine print and say, okay, this one has this one has that, how do they compare? But now it's not as difficult, and that's because of RESPA. Now, There's another acronym that we talked about, and that is TRID, T-R-I-D, and that includes RESPA. And that's all that loan estimate, closing disclosure stuff that I'm talking about. And it stands for Truth in Lending Statement, or Truth in Lending Act, Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act. In other words, TILA RESPA, that's the T and the R, TILA RESPA Information Disclosure. And that's what kind of governs and requires this similar formatting and full disclosure, full transparency kind of a thing. So, all that said, question 14, an example of a kickback prohibited by RESPA is a fee paid by a surveyor to a broker for a lead on a property needing to be surveyed. Classic example. Let's look at the other ones. A fee paid by the listing agent to an agent who made the referral. Is that illegal? It's not even illegal, right? Because an agent can pay another agent a referral fee. There's nothing wrong with that at all, and it certainly doesn't even have anything to do with RESPA. RESPA is about a licensed broker interacting with a vendor that's a non-agent and passing money back and forth, which is that's the thing that's not allowed. Now, if that licensed vendor had a real estate license, let's say that mortgage person had a real estate license, could you pay them a referral fee? Or could they pay you a referral fee? Yeah. So you kind of can go around it in a way. So then could they pay you for sending them that piece of business? Sort of, because you could pay them a referral fee, or they could pay you one, right? And there's a lender in Charlotte that's doing that, and he's been running into occasionally some pushback. But hey, we as a licensed agent can pay another licensed agent. It goes a different direction with him though. Instead of agent to agent, he's saying every agent should get their mortgage license. It doesn't take that much. I mean, you do have to study and take a test, but if you do all that, you can hang your mortgage license with his company, and then he can pay you a referral, sort of like how we can pay each other referrals. But that's just to give you the example, not a testable. Don't worry about that. What about a commission shared by the listing broker with one of her provisional brokers? Can a listing broker share commission? We can give all of our money away that we want to in a transaction or to other brokers. So there's another one. What if you're in a transaction and you're the listing broker and then there's a buyer agent as well? Can you represent the seller, can you give up some of your commission to the buyer? If it means holding the deal together. Maybe the buyer's mad. The seller won't fix something the buyer's insisting on. The buyer's like, well, I'm not buying it. And you're like, oh, I got to pay the bills. Let's just get this little $1,000 item squared away. I don't want to be known as the giving realtor who rolls over the minute somebody pushes back. But if I'm making 25 grand, maybe I'll pay $1,000 to hold this thing together. You know, you still got to pay the light bill. Is it legal? Yeah, because they are a party to the transaction, but they don't have a license. Doesn't matter. They're still a party to the transaction, right? And as a buyer agent, can you give your own buyer client money in a transaction? Yeah, same thing. It would be called a buyer rebate. Now, this is state specific. I've seen some Facebook forums, I think just this morning or last night, somebody was writing something or other. In other states, that's illegal. But in North Carolina, it's allowed. Rebates are allowed. And there are some buyer agents who advertise that. That's their main attracting point headline. They say, hey, if you buy with me, I'll rebate you 1% of my commission. And what I think they mean is if I make 3% commission, I'll take 2 and rebate you 1 of those 3, give you the other one. I don't think it means I'll give you 1% of my total dollars. That'd be like a couple $100. I think they mean like 2/3 or so, basically, right? Hey, whatever works. That's a business decision between you and your firm if you want to do that and if your firm will let you. Flowers that an agent sends to the buyer as a housewarming gift. Well, who are the parties? That's how you can identify these RESPA violations. Who are the parties involved? In that case, it's you and your client. And yeah, you can give your client a housewarming gift or a closing gift. Closing gifts have a limit. You can't give them like a $10,000 closing gift. It's got to be a nominal value. But that just means for tax purposes. You can't deduct more than a nominal value, which I think last I checked was like about $50. You can't just use this $2,000 gift as a tax deduction, but you could give them a $2,000 gift if you wanted to. It's just that for tax purposes, you wouldn't be able to write all of that off. But you and your client, yeah, you can give them gifts. They can give you gifts. I've gotten a couple of gifts over the years. So RESPA is about leads for people. I mean, money for leads. What else? I love it. Keep going. Anybody else, just keep putting them out there. This is the good stuff. Property management. Let's see if I can remember the right one. I actually got this wrong when I took this test, but I have it around here somewhere. In North Carolina, property management is not true. D was not true. Cannot deposit tenant security deposits in the same trust account with earnest money deposits for sales transactions. They actually can. I do know that now. Have reminded myself of it. What did you say? Property. Okay. So let's read it. In North Carolina, property management in North Carolina, a property manager cannot employ unlicensed people to act as on-site leasing agents. So let's be careful we don't get tripped up with the negatives. Maybe there are double negatives sometimes. I don't think this is, but they're not saying in North Carolina what's true except the following. They're saying which thing is true. And it is actually not true. In other words, they are allowed to hire unlicensed people. And if you think about it, it was some of the first material we covered in license law and commission rule. What can unlicensed people do? Well, but we had a little section of that unlicensed behavior that applied to unlicensed W-2 employees of property managers. And they can do a little more that's actual considered real estate because it's in the field of property management instead of sales. So a lot of times when you go in these apartment complex model units, show places, whatever they call them, the office, that person sitting there quite often is like fresh out of college or in college. They're in that 20-something range and they don't have a license. Not that they couldn't because of the age. I'm just saying that tends to be what you see a lot of times, but frequently they don't have licenses. They might get one and it might get paid for by their boss because it is nice for them to know their laws and rules, but it's not a requirement for them to do their job because there's already a broker in the mix. Their boss has the broker license. They don't have to. So we weeded out A and D. Is it true that a person that is paid to manage property only for family members requires an active broker license? All right, they're doing it for somebody other than themselves, only for family members. Don't let that trip you up. It's a different person than you. You are not your sister, right? Unless you're in some states. I don't know. That was a weird joke. And you're paid to do real estate for someone else, right? So I'm feeling like B is probably the right answer. Person that's paid to manage property, they're paid to do real estate for someone else, and that requires an active broker's license. I don't see anything wrong with that one, but let's check C just to be sure. A property manager must be designated as a broker in charge. No, you don't have to be the broker in charge to be a property manager. That's enough. Good grief. Either of those two job descriptions would be enough in and of themselves. Maybe you can remember it from my history that my last firm I joined or was at, that broker in charge, the owner of the firm, and turns out he didn't allow us to be property managers because he didn't want to be the BIC of property managers and have to deal with the responsibility and making sure that, and I think it's because he's never done it. And the Real Estate Commission says, don't be a BIC over people doing stuff you've never done. If you've never done commercial, you better not, as a broker in charge, have any commercial brokers under you. How can you be in charge of them? How can you BIC them if you've not done the things that they're doing? Same for property management. So it's B. The state, exactly. We're on the state at the moment, but either is fair game. I'm ready for both. You just throw something out there. Okay. Yeah. 55. Which of the following terms may appear in an advertisement for a real estate loan without triggering Regulation Z? We're talking about the trigger terms. And let's think about what that means. What are trigger terms? What do they relate to? Think about a car advertisement. What's the most popular car ad? They don't like to talk about that $90,000 Escalade. They like to say, well, it's yours for only $750 a month. They like to talk about payments. And when you're there negotiating, they try to keep you away from the price and talk about, well, what's comfortable payment? Because they want to hide all those extra finance charges, right? So that's basically trigger terms. And it works in real estate. The psychology of it works in this too, because it's huge prices. So it's like, let's not think that it's $400,000. Let's think that it's only $2,200 a month, and the rent would be $25,000, and blah blah blah. So anytime you're advertising a price or the things that are affecting the price, like an interest rate or the duration of the loan, or how many loan payments, or the amount borrowed, all of those things that relate to the price are trigger terms. And so if you advertise any one of those things, you have to advertise all of those things. So that's the gist of it. But it's easy to get confused because you're like, wait, what's the difference in all of that? What if it says builder will pay your closing costs? And don't get too in the weeds and think, yeah, but does the closing cost affect the payment? Not directly. So therefore, that's not a trigger term. You could say, yeah, but if you paid enough, some of that could be discount points, and that could, no. You're reading too much into it. In and of itself, what directly affects the payment? The duration, the number of payments, the loan amount, the interest rate, the payment itself. Those basic 4 or 5 things are the trigger terms. So out of this list, which thing is a payment or related to a payment? Definitely A, it says so. You can own this house for $499 a month. So that's a trigger term that does trigger Reg Z, and we're looking for the thing that doesn't, as the wording of the question says. What about only 1 penny down? Well, the down payment affects it because that affects the loan amount, right? And then 8% interest rate or lower, obviously the rate directly affects the payment. So the most generic, it's really the non-trigger terms tend to be the generically worded things. Like, yeah, that gets me every time personally when I'm taking tests. I have to think really hard about it before I will let myself change it, because for some reason that first instinct tends to be the right one for me. But it's not universal. Some people change into the right answer. I've graded enough papers back when we did that in person, you know, when I had these live classes in person, I have to actually grade like a school teacher. And I'm like, oh man, you could see the erase mark. They had it. And they had it wrong and they changed into the right one. So I realized 50-50. It's just, you got to know you, and you just have to just re-examine it and think hard before you commit. So assumable mortgage is available, generic, doesn't directly affect the payment. So, yeah, it's typical. It's common. Keep going. No, qualifying process considers borrower's housing expenses. So that was related to the qualifying ratios, right? And we talked about the only ratios you need to worry about are the conventional ones. So the basic conventional ratios, qualifying ratios, are 28% and 36%, meaning another word for that is the 28% is the front end ratio, 36% is the back end ratio. And what that's pertaining to is what? no more than 28% of the gross monthly income can be for principal, interest, taxes, insurance, and also PMI if applicable, if there is PMI in the loan. And then the back end ratio says, well, yeah, but that's not all people pay for. People have cars, people have recurring debt, student debt, medical bills. So any sort of recurring debt, sorry, I got critters bothering me. PITI, back up. Plus recurring debt, like credit cards, car payments, student loans, because that's the real world. You know, it's all fine and dandy to say, oh, I can afford that house payment, but you've also chosen to have a BMW car payment. So if you want this house and you want to max out what you can afford, maybe you need to turn that into a Toyota car payment and sell that beaver downscale, which is more important. And that's a real world choice people have to make sometimes. So with that, where'd we go? There we go. The home loan qualifying process considers borrowers' housing expenses, including which of the following? So what's the lender looking for when they're checking those qualifying ratios? Annual medical expenses? No, we're focusing on monthly. They're worried about your monthly budget. Monthly grocery bills, right? Which one did you say, or were you tempted to say? Just curious. Maybe taxes. So, you know, that's another one. I'm a little bit of a Scrooge about test questions sometimes, and I'm like, annual taxes, I get their point. Their point is the lender's looking for the monthly budget. Even though annual taxes do affect the monthly taxes, is there a better answer out of this mess? Yes, the one that says specifically monthly. And so monthly PITI and PMI is actually the better answer out of the four. You do the yeah, but, and say, yeah, but annual taxes divided by 12 is monthly, and monthly taxes is in the PITI. So I get it. I get that confusion point, but that's why you have to read every answer choice and think, okay, this one's a kind of a bad answer, but it's possibly true, but this one is a much better answer. Yeah. You're welcome. What else? Real Estate Commission believes that a broker's responsibility for settlement statements include all of the following components except, oh boy, this one gets me. That darn except word. I just get all caught up in the question and I forget that we're looking for the opposite thing. So one thing you could do that I use as a tactic is on your scratch paper, write your 31 ABCD and just forget about the question, but just say, is this statement A true in and of itself? T or F, true or false? Make a little note, T, or whatever it is. In this case, false. And then what about the others? And then it'll reveal itself. You'll have a T, 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 and an F, or an F, 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 and a T, right? And that'll kind of help you cut through the nonsense of the double negative or the negative. So we are looking for the thing that's not true. Broker's responsibility includes all the following except. Which one does it not include? And if you need to read it in your brain, in your mind, in those 2 or 3 different ways, just to kind of help focus yourself before you start reading the answer choices, that might be useful. So, yeah. So you were thinking, well, brokers don't complete it themselves, the attorney does? Yeah. I guess we could spin that and say the accuracy and completion. Accuracy obviously means what it says, but completion means is everything there that's supposed to be there. It's not that you're completing it. I could see, and it's Monday morning quarterbacking I'm doing right here. I'm like, yeah, looking at the answer and knowing which one's right or wrong, easy for me to analyze it, but hopefully it's useful. But is it true that a broker should review the disclosure for accuracy and completion, making sure it's true and making sure that everything is filled out? Yes, that is true. So I'd put a little T there. Is it true that a broker is expected to verify entries, not all the entries, but they're not saying all of them, the ones known from the contract? So yes, we filled out, generated that contract. We should be responsible for making sure it gets transferred over properly. And then a broker should verify that calculations are correct. Yeah, sadly, sorry, yes. We don't have to plug them into the magical little software, but we do have to know what we're doing enough. And that's what you're going to deep dive in when you get to post 302. You'll actually have to generate and put it in the right spots on the closing disclosure in post 302. The test is still easier than this pre-test, so just a little encouragement there. So all three of B, C, and D are true. A obviously is the right answer. A broker is expected to confirm accuracy of all entries. They like to test you on that. We are not responsible for all of the entries because some of them are not related to us, not directly involving us. We had nothing to do with that lender's origination fee. That's the lender's choice. How do we know what it is? That's for the lender to answer and verify that got correctly put on there. Because it might help to understand kind of how this works in the real world. We might be the source of referring them to a good lender. Quite often we are, but we're not there and involved in every single meeting and every single phone call between them and that lender. They're kind of doing their thing, and maybe we check in with them from time to time. How's it going? But there's a disconnect a little bit. So that borrower, buyer, and that lender have their own little relationship happening and business stuff going, and then we are helping on the real estate side. So that lender is going to help that borrower understand the loan fees, and when the closing disclosure gets printed, they're going to go over it with the borrower and say, well, our fees look to be correct on here. And then you're going to also get the closing disclosure, and you're going to say, well, everything else that I had anything to do with looks to be correct on here, which is pretty much everything except that first box on that second or third page that we saw in the closing disclosure. That's where the origination fee and discount points and like a tax certification fee and a couple things that are specific to the lender would be located. Does that help? Next. On the state. During due diligence in North Carolina, the standard offer to purchase and contract, the buyer did not receive final loan approval, but chose not to terminate the contract based on favorable communications from the lender. A week before closing, the buyer's loan application is denied. If the buyer terminates the contract at this point, what's going to happen? So what do we know? Is the contract the standard one, standard 2T that we tend to use, which is what this test is going to test you on? Although we could still use anything, we're not required to use that 2T, but the test when it relates to contract questions, specifically on the state portion, is going to be testing you on the 2T version. But your client could buy one from Staples and say, use this one. And you'd be like, I don't want to. And they're like, I want you to. Okay, I'll fill in the blanks. But it's probably not as good as the 2T. So anyway, as per the 2T, is there a finance contingency? If your loan gets denied, can you, the buyer, walk away and get your earnest money and due diligence money back at all? No. Because there's not unless you put one in, you could attach one, have an attorney write one and attach it. So besides that, can the buyer get back the earnest money if they choose to walk away from? Go ahead. I see you're about to say something. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So you're going to have to break it down. And sometimes the word buyer breach throws us because we're like, wait, the buyer just chose not to buy it. Is that a breach? Well, yeah, technically it is. They're not going through with it. Now, does that mean they're going to have this whole big laundry list of fees and penalties? No. The only things in jeopardy that the buyer could stand to lose are the two things that are called liquidated damages, and those are due diligence money and earnest money. So there's that. Then it's these questions tend to be sure thing. I saw that. Tend to be about the timing, about the due diligence deadline. They like to test you on which thing is the buyer entitled to get back, depending on when in the transaction they back out. So what did they do here? A week before closing, buyer's loan. Yeah. Okay. During due diligence period, buyer did not receive loan approval but chose not to terminate. Okay, they did not do any backing out while they were still in the protection due diligence period, right? It's not officially called the protection period, but that's sort of what's happening. What if they had backed out during the due diligence period? What money would they be entitled to get back? Earnest money or due diligence money or both or neither? They never get the due diligence back. Right. Yeah, earnest. So it's all about the earnest. That's why I jokingly, half jokingly, say that we should call the due diligence period the earnest money period, because it's really about the earnest money. That's what you stand to get back. You're never getting the due diligence back unless the seller just straight up, flat out breaches on their end. And by the way, Deborah, since you asked if the seller does breach, in other words, puts on the brakes and says, I'm not selling, I changed my mind, that would open them up to getting sued for specific performance, specifically performing the contract. They promised. It's kind of unbalanced a little bit. If a buyer said to you, well, if I change my mind later, I can back out, and that is true. They're not forced to buy. The question is, how much money are they going to have to walk away from and lose if they back out? If they back out during due diligence, they're walking away from however much the due diligence money is. If they walk away after that deadline, they're also going to walk away from the earnest money. But the seller, they can't just change their mind with no penalty. There's not like, oh, you're just going to lose this one little chunk of money. The seller's opening up themselves to a whole world of potential hurt, because seller breach opens them up to getting sued for specific performance. And that means this house on this dirt is very unique. How much would that cost? If they got sued for specific performance, how much is that house worth? That's a lot more than maybe due diligence and earnest money, right? And on top of that, the buyer could also say, and I spent $15,000 on inspections and due diligence money and earnest money and in good faith trying to get this purchase to happen. And so I want that money too. So I would say the seller probably stands to lose more than the buyer does if they back out, if they breach, right? So back to this one, we are outside of the due diligence period that has come and gone. And now if the buyer walks away, can they? Can they walk away? Yes. But how much money are they walking away from? Whatever the due diligence plus earnest money adds up to, because they're going to lose both. And so with that, buyer terminates the contract, they will forfeit the earnest money because it would be a buyer breach. Now, I know it doesn't, I guess to be more complete, they should say as well as the due diligence money. So I get the confusion. Yeah, total. Yeah. But let's, that might help if we read the other answers and see, oh, these other answers are definitively wrong, right? This one is sort of murky gray, but those are definitely wrong. So how about we'll receive a refund of the earnest money since the termination was related to financing? Well, since there is no built-in finance contingency, that can't be right. Can be sued by the seller for specific performance. That's the wrong direction. Buyers don't get sued for specific performance. Sellers do. So B and C, oh, okay. Gotcha. And then we'll receive a refund of the earnest money and the due diligence fee. Well, we know that that's next to never going to happen unless they tell us more info that involves the seller breaching. And none of that is something happening here. So those other answer choices, knowing those could help you realize, well, as lame as it is, A is still the best answer. I'm talking a lot of trash about these test questions. Somebody's going to get mad someday if they ever hear me. It's hard to write good test questions because you think, oh, I nailed it this time. But then later, wait a minute, that's kind of ambiguous. That's kind of hard to decipher. So I feel for the people that have to do this, but then I think they get bored and they're like, what can we do to make this spicy? Okay, I don't know. What else? Sure. Amount of interest on a $68,000 mortgage at 11.6% rate for 9 months. All right, they are making you kind of have to cut and paste a little bit. And what do we know about the interest rate? What's the name of that interest rate? I'm using a reduced version of the name of the interest rate. 11.6%. It's not just the interest rate, it's the annual interest rate. So when you multiply that loan amount times that 11.6, you're getting the amount of interest in dollars for the whole year, right? And then as that loan gets paid down, you multiply that smaller, like in the very first month, which you have out there outstanding that you owe is $68,000. That's the original loan amount. But after you make that first month's payment, now you only owe $67,850. A little teensy bit less. Now, if you wanted to know how much is my interest for the year, you would take that $67,750 or whatever I just made up times the 11.6%. And that's going to tell you, well, now based on this current loan balance that I've paid down to, the amount of dollars of interest for the year, if I had to pay it, is this much. So think about that rate as the annual rate, the APR. And with that said, can we come up with the number of interest in dollars that $68,000 requires you to pay? That's kind of awkward wording, but let me try again. We've got a loan amount of $68,000. That's what we're borrowing. We're borrowing at 11.6%. And they want to know 9 months worth. Back up. So what would be the annual interest for the whole year in dollars? Remember, annual tax and annual interest is kind of the same relationship. So annual, oops, I said it, and so I wrote it. Annual interest, 68,000 is the loan amount, times 11.6% is the rate. And so that is a $78.88 annual dollars of interest paid. That's how much you would be paying in the whole year if this didn't change, right? Well, we're just working with this moment in time. So if this is the interest for the year, how much would that be per month? I'm going to take that $78.88 divided by 12. And so monthly it's $657.33. But they're asking about what would 9 months worth of the interest be. And so now, since we know our monthly, just multiply it by 9. And there you go. So when you were talking about interest, remember that that's an annual interest rate. So if you multiply that rate times the amount being borrowed, it gives you an annual amount of dollars that you're paying in interest. If we knew a loan factor, If they gave us one of those and therefore we knew our principal and interest, then we could subtract that interest that we just calculated and tell how much that principal got paid down after that first month's payment, right? So we did see a little piece of this type of question in that type of question. We had to figure out our annual interest in dollars using the rate and the loan amount as step one. $37. Lender agrees to lend 80% of the appraised value of a townhouse. Oh, okay. At a 6.5% interest rate for 30 years. And don't forget, sometimes they'll give you more than you need to work with. The home appraised for $125,000. Borrowers charge 2 discount points. What is the cost to the buyer? So what's the formula for determining how much discount points cost? How much are discount points? Not the dollars in this question, but just in general. Yeah, because you know that 1 discount point costs 1% of the loan amount. So 2 discount points are going to cost 2%. So then the question is, yeah, but what's the loan amount? So what's being borrowed? Lender agrees to lend 80% of the appraised value, and the appraised value is $125,000. So we're going to take 125 times 80%. Means we're borrowing $100,000. That's our loan amount. And 2% of that. It's $2,000. What was your sticking point on that? Got it. Yep. And when you did that, was that one of the answer choices? Oh, yeah. They like that trick. Yeah. Yeah, of course. That help? What else we got? Mm-hmm. North Carolina Connor Act. Pause. What is it? Let's remember. The two things that I remember them together. One of them is the thing that says it must be in writing to be enforceable. And the other one says it must be recorded to protect it against other people coming in and claiming ownership. Which is which? Statute of Frauds or Connor Act? Basically I was saying, what's the Connor Act? Does it say it must be in writing to be enforceable, or does it say it must be recorded to protect against third-party claims? Is Connor Act about recording or in writing? It's the other one. It's the other one. Statute of Frauds. And I'm trying to think. I think I've thought of some memory aids on that. You know, what is fraud? It's when people lie with their paperwork, right? They're kind of, I'm thinking of like white collar crime and fraudulent and their false loan applications or whatever. So it's paper. So maybe statute of frauds. Frauds means paper in writing. So that might be helpful to you. Statute of frauds must be in writing to be enforceable. So the Connor Act is the other one. It says you need to record some things like what? The deed and the deed of trust in particular, in order to protect against someone else coming along and saying, yeah, but I own 10% of this too. No, you don't, because I recorded it and then just in my name, and you weren't here then. So you're out. Whoever records first wins. So with that reminder, Under the Connor Act, all the following must be recorded to be valid against third parties. So they kind of gave us the definition of the Connor Act right there, didn't they? Except. So now we're looking for which documents, which legal instruments do not have to be recorded under the Connor. Okay. Yeah. Contracts don't get recorded. Imagine that. If for every contract we had to go down to the courthouse and record it, that would be annoying. And what purpose would it even serve, right? Because it could fall through. Just because you have a contract doesn't mean it's going to close. But when you have a deed that is closed, that's much more final, right? And much more like locked in. So it wouldn't even make sense to record contracts. But a lease for more than 3 years in duration, we saw that weird little nuance. It goes back to the tenant getting protected. It's probably a commercial lease, right? So if someone bought that owner out, and if it were a 3-year or less lease that wasn't recorded, that's protected. That one's got some built-in protections. But if it's more than 3 years in duration and some commercial owner buys them out, then the tenant who does not have a written lease that's been recorded could stand to get booted out. Deed of trust, that gets recorded, and restrictive covenants, that's how we know what they are, because they're on the public record. Oh, I've been showing you a blank screen. Number 6. Which of the following would not make a contract voidable? All right, pause. Let's think about the words again. Let's say we've got valid, voidable, and void. These things, what do we know? They all could close successfully. Every one of them. Even though they're in jeopardy, the parties involved are in jeopardy, could end up having the whole thing fall apart and possibly not have anything they could do about it. It's unenforceable for some of them. But in each of these cases, all 3 of these boxes, any contract that's either valid, voidable, or void could still successfully close. It's not about whether it's good and closable. It's about consequences. Who has consequences in these different buckets for breaking their promise spelled out in the contract? When it's a valid contract, which of the 2 parties have consequences? Both of them. When it's a voidable contract, which of them have consequences? 1 or 2? 1 or both? Just one side. The one that's not 18, sane, or sober. And then when it's a void contract, which of them have consequences? Neither. Right, basically. Best example of a void contract is no contract. Verbal. Nothing in writing, at least. So when you think of it in those terms, it kind of, I think, helps, because sometimes we think, well, that lottery ticket is void if I scratch more than one of the boxes. And that's not the same concept, right? And I think that's what confuses people. So with that reminder, let's look at the question. We've got, which of the following would not make a contract voidable? The buyer has only 48 hours to locate and purchase a property and is feeling duress. Does duress affect a contract by making it voidable or void? No. Broker and seller failed to disclose a material defect. Does that make it voidable or void? Voidable is about the people. It's about whether they're 18, sane, or sober. So that's not going on. That's not what's going on here. The buyer has been adjudicated incompetent by a court of competent jurisdiction. Well, what's the little nuance about the sane part of avoidable contract. If someone is judged not able to take care of themselves medically, not in court, but medically, medical diagnosis of Alzheimer's, for instance, then it's a voidable contract. It's about the people. But the exception is if a court had to step in and say, well, now we're going to make it a legal thing. And so when the court steps in, it becomes, instead of voidable, becomes void because it was a court ruling. Yeah. A minor inherited a property and sold it to an adult. That's a voidable thing. The question is, which of the following would not make it voidable? The court ruling does not make it voidable. The court ruling makes it void instead of voidable. Was that a request for number one? I think he might have. Is he still around? Giovanni, were you saying, or were you answering my question? Oh, okay. Okay. What else? Okay, sure. Find it. I got in the pool this morning and I managed to swim at the Y while I'm scrolling through. I missed 4 days in a row. It was a terrible week. Had to put my dog down. So I messed up 2 days because I was trying to figure that out. And a couple other weird things happened. And you get in a little habit of things and you miss things when you don't get to keep doing your little habit. License law. Do you have the question in front of you while I'm... Yeah. Yes. So the one about that one is that broker in North Carolina that they must affiliate with does not have to be a broker in charge. It can be just a plain broker. Any broker who does commercial. So the best answer choice there was the second to last one you said. I'm trying to remember what that was. Oh, they'd have to have an active license in the state where they reside. Yep. What was the first answer choice there while I'm still looking? Oh, I got it. Right. Okay. And then the second one? That's not required. I found it. Now we can go to have more of them if you have them. Anything else from that one? Yeah. Let's see. Let's take a look. Non-provisional broker Stephen, is that the right one? has been contacted by a buyer who wants to make an offer on this property, listed by Angela, serving as broker in charge at Stephen's office. So we pause a second and think, what are we going to probably be dealing with here? We're dealing with an in-house sale, so it wouldn't be surprising if this turns into a dual agent or a designated agent thing. Broker Stephen reviews the working with agents disclosure, has the buyer sign a buyer agency agreement. That's good. Which of the following is true? So he's non-provisional. He's working with the buyer up against the broker in charge who has a listing in his same firm. Can he work against his broker in charge if this becomes a designated dual agent situation? Can this non-provisional? Yeah, that's no problem. That is okay. Just to kind of recap this little topic area, right? Yeah. Yes. So good. That's a good thing to mention. Then let's take a look here. So first thing we're going to explain to the client is what dual agency is. We're going to tell them, look, guys, I can help you and be the only agent involved. You want to buy my listing at my firm and you're a buyer, I can be your buyer agent while still being the seller's agent. But there's a limitation. And so what's the limitation out of the old car responsibilities? Which one cannot exist with dual agency? Which one is off? Yeah, that loyalty. I used to get confused by this and say confidentiality for some reason. But we still have to keep their secrets from each other, even if we know the stuff. So if we know what the seller might actually be willing to sell and come down to, even though the seller's saying, I'm not coming down below 550, but you know they would go to 530, you can't tell. And if that buyer loves you and says, I trust you and this house is like the one I grew up in and I would pay 560 if I had to, you can't tell the seller that. And so that's how I explain it in real life. I say, look, guys, here's how this works. I can't tell you the lowest the seller would take. I can't tell the seller the most you might be willing to pay if you shared that with me. But besides that, I have to be honest and ethical and fair to both of you. And I can't give either one of you more preferential treatment than the other, which is loyalty. So loyalty is off the table with dual agency. It is restored with designated agency, because they might say, well, that's stupid. Why would anybody agree to dual? And I say, you're right. I agree. It's not great. And I don't blame you for not liking it. Well, then I'm just going to go to this other firm, get my own buyer agent, and come back and buy your listing with them. Okay, well, I got one more solution for you. You don't need to leave the firm. I can connect you with another broker in our firm who can be your designated agent, restore the loyalty. We can treat it like it's two separate firms again. Like two separate firms. It's not, but we can behave that way. What's one requirement to engaging in designated dual agency? If you're going to connect that buyer with their own agent within your firm while you stick with your seller, what is it about what these brokers know or don't know about the opposite parties? What's very important before you can designate someone as a dual agent, as a designated dual agent? Let me word it better. Yes, correct. No confidential info can be known up front. What if once you start working with them, you've become their designated dual agent helping the buyer, and the other one is the designated dual agent helping the seller? What if because of maybe the grapevine, knowing a friend of a friend, reading a social media post, overhearing a conversation, later you learn confidential info? What is your obligation as the designated buyer's agent if you happen to find out some motivational thing about the seller? You got to tell your client. You got to tell your buyer. First and foremost, your obligation is to your buyer. Hopefully you didn't learn that confidential info because the firm was negligent in maintaining confidential information. Like you didn't go into the file cabinets and look up the other party's stuff. That would not be cool. Or you didn't overhear your broker in charge talking about it, or, right? Hopefully there were no leaks, because then the firm could be in jeopardy of getting in trouble, because they need to keep all those files confidential and really protect the confidence as best as possible. But the external possible sources like social media sharing or friend of a friend, it's weird. It can be a small world. We don't know who we know that we know. Like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. You ever heard that? Everybody in the world is connected by 6 people. I just realized that I'm connected within 3 people to Taylor Swift, because a friend of mine that I actually knows her current touring guitar player. I don't know that guitar player, but I know the person who knows the guitar player. So I know her, and she knows him, and he knows Taylor. So it's like, oh, that's kind of crazy. Doesn't do me any good, but so with that, dual versus designated, let's look at the question. Non-provisional broker Steven has been contacted by a buyer who wants to make an offer listed by another person, actually his own broker in charge. He reviews the working with agents disclosure, has the buyer sign, so he is a buyer agent. So which thing is true? I like those better. I get mixed up with the exceptions. Is it true that Steven cannot work as a designated dual agent opposite his own broker in charge? There's no problem with him doing that, so this is actually not the answer. Is it true that Steven and Angela can continue as designated dual agents with the informed written consent of both parties? That sounds pretty darn good, besides the fact for the green check. But in general, yeah, I don't see a problem with that. Informed consent is huge. Both parties can have undisclosed dual agency. Everybody's got to know that you're doing it and give permission for you to do it. Is it true that Steven and Angela can continue as designated dual agents with the written consent of the buyer and the oral consent of the seller? No, lopsided. Both have to give written consent. Is it true that they can continue as dual agents but not designated agents in this transaction? There is no limitation on them being designated dual agents, right? So I can't impress upon you the importance enough about the importance to read every answer. Just when you think you might have one figured out, there might be one that's still just a little bit better. What else? Is this still license law? Yeah. Oh, gotcha. Which scenario best represents a legal timeshare ownership? So, recap. What's a timeshare? A timeshare is owning the rights to use it for 5 times over 5 periods. At least, I should say that. At least. That's the main thing. At least 5 times over 5 periods or years. 5 days to rescind if you want to back out from when you sign up. I bet a lot of people have buyer's remorse with these 10 days that the developer has to keep the earnest money so that they can give it back to them if they choose to rescind, right? I'm not sure why it's 10 instead of 5, but just roll with it. And then $500 per violation. So let's keep these first 2 5s in mind when we read the question again. And that is membership at a resort that allows you to visit at least 5 weeks over at least 5 years. Is it membership? No. How about shared ownership that allows you to visit at least 5 weeks over the next 10 years? That sounds okay, because it's at least 5 weeks and it's at least 5 years. 10 is at least 5, right? So I feel like I got it wrong, obviously. I feel like B is probably the answer, but let's keep going. Shared ownership at a resort that allows you to visit at least 5 weeks over 3 years. That's not going to work because that's not at least 5 years. And then none of the above. So B, let me double check, but I'm pretty. Right. You wanted to see all fives. And when that 10 came up, so it's important, I guess, to expand on that and say at least 5 times over those 5 years. If they write more than 5, that's okay, because they just can't, it can't be for less than in order to still be considered a timeshare. It's also not necessary because you're probably not going to sell them. I don't think I've met anybody in CE class yet that deals with them. I know some do, but every time I ask about them, my next question is, how many of you wish you didn't have it? They like it the first 2 or 3 years, but then they're done. So it's B. Yeah, I think I probably got tripped up for the same reason. I was so focused on the 5 and the 5 that I ignored the membership versus the ownership. It's an ownership. It's not just a membership to a club. It's owning the thing. You're owning the rights to use it for that time period. What else we got? While you're still thinking, let me go over that whole back and forth offer and contract, offer and acceptance thing. And anytime I see a problem like that, you know what I do? I just draw out our little volleyball court with our net. And number one question is, are we dealing with a buyer agent helping that buyer or a sub agent to seller? Which one? Because that has to do with notification. If this buyer agent, or let me just say this, the selling agent, we don't yet know which one of these it is. If they make the offer over here to the listing agent, that listing agent tells the seller signs it unchanged. Do we have a contract? Seller has it. They have not yet told their listing agent that they agreed to it and signed it. So do we have a contract yet? It's not even been any communication. Seller just got it and signed it. Started watching a movie and forgot to tell anybody. Okay, let's advance it. Seller has signed it, but also told their listing agent they signed it. Are we under contract? Still no. Because we're all on the same side still, right? Nothing has crossed the net. Now that listing agent tells the selling agent, are we under contract? We don't know because the question hasn't yet told us which one of these things is happening. How's that buyer being represented? Are they represented by a buyer agent? So the listing agent communicates to the buyer agent that it has been accepted and signed. Then yes, we are now under contract. Telling the buyer agent is the same as telling the buyer. Even if that buyer is out of the country and won't hear about this news for 2 more days and comes back and decides they don't want it, sorry, buyer, you better go ahead and write that due diligence and earnest money check. I don't want to. You can't make me. Well, you're right. I can't make you, but the court might. The seller might choose to sue you over it. I'm not the enforcer. I can just tell you that we are under contract because the buyer agent was told that the seller accepted and signed, and that's good enough. Well, make me. I don't have to. I'm the broker. Or we could just move on with life and go find another one. All right. I mean, that's the thing. Here's the other one. What if the buyer is from California and they've narrowed down to 3 houses and they don't want to miss or risk losing out on any of the three, can they make offers on all three houses even if they only qualify to buy one? Can a buyer make offers on three different houses even if they can only afford to buy one of them? Does that mean they would be obligated to buy all three? No. It just means they better come up with the due diligence money. They better be able to pay three due diligence checks and then pick one house that's actually going to turn into hopefully a closing. So however many offers they can afford to write due diligence checks for, they can offer 10 houses if they want to, however much those due diligences are. Back in the day when they were not so crazy, like 1,000 or 2, if you were coming from California, you probably just made a bunch of money selling that house that's not so great, but it's overpriced, and so you got all this money. So maybe 3 different houses, $3,000, $1,000 each for due diligence, just so that you don't have to worry about losing one if one while you're negotiating the other. Well, I guess you would already be under contract. The point of that story is they haven't been able to come here and see them in person yet. So they might want to tie up all 3 of them until they can come see them, because making an offer sight unseen is kind of scary in general. Back to this question. What if the listing agent communicated to the sub-agent to seller that the offer was signed and accepted? The buyer hasn't been told yet. We are still not under contract. Because it's all about the buyer knowing, since the buyer is not represented by a buyer agent, but only by a sub-agent to seller, which means somehow or other that agent has not managed to get a buyer agency agreement signed. By default, they're this. And so therefore, until they've actually communicated to the buyer that that thing was signed and accepted, it's not under contract. So it could be this whole long paragraph of details, and you just have to dissect it and think, at what point did they communicate? In what case? Probably won't get communication. What do you mean? Oh, commission. Well, maybe. I keep meaning to do this search. Maybe I'll remember to do it now, but I can do a search and see in the MLS how many listings are paying more than 0 to the sub-agent to seller. And last time I did it was years ago, and it was like 12,000 out of many, many more listings. So it still exists. There are some sellers that are like, I don't care. The whole reason for offering 0 to a selling agent is for liability protection. We want that buyer to have their own buyer agent in case we're wrong on some stuff. Then they're a little bit on the hook for it too. So that's the main reason why. But let's see here. SA. What else do we have while I'm fiddling around? Anything? Anything's fair game. Yeah, sure. Oh, you know what? I bet they did away with it because it's been kind of in the court system. So there's an outstanding case accusing agents of not showing property because they did a search for certain amounts that they earn on certain properties. So they wouldn't, maybe they weed out anything that's paying less than 2% or something. And so in order to enforce that, I hate when you have to be limited because of somebody being a jerk. I just want to know the stat. I don't want to do it to somebody, but it's like we all have to be kindergartners and take it away from the rest of us. I'm just curious, but I don't think it's here anymore. It used to be. Yeah. Meets and bounds. Yeah. So good question. That is, let me pull that up. Legal description, right? It's all about legal description and how to identify property. And so what are the three, besides meets and bounds, what are the other two forms of legal description we accept and use here in North Carolina? Meets and bounds is the best way and preferred way, but it's actually not the most common. A lot of times I'm not having to find this long paragraph of start at the stake at the corner of this street and that street and go 5 degrees northwest, 300 yards. It's not that big long pages and pages of description. It's a reference to either a prior recorded deed, that's another acceptable version, or a reference to a plat map. So those are the three. Meets and bounds, reference to a prior recorded deed, or reference to a recorded plat map showing it laid out. All of those things are recorded. And what are some words involved in a meets and bounds description? What are some terms? What are the two versions of, what do we do, what do they do in not in North Carolina, like the rest of the country? Meets and bounds is the best way, and it's the way in Texas as well as the 13 colonies, original colonies. But all the other parts of the country use the government rectangular survey method. That's like a grid system. And so you need to know the terminology for both. So for meets and bounds, we've got that point of beginning because that description, okay, good, I've got it. That's that long paragraph that's all written out, and if you were to draw it out, it would start here at this point, go this direction for this many feet, go this direction for this many feet, and this direction, and maybe this one, and then finally back to here. So the point of beginning has to also be the point of ending so that it's a closed shape. Oops, that didn't work. So that it's this closed shape. It can't be like this because that doesn't define the property. There's this big fat open space here. So there's that. There's distance, direction, point of beginning, point of ending. I think that's about it. This is all meets and bounds. Meets and bounds, because we are following, it looks like this. I found the meets and bounds for my property the other day, coincidentally. It actually exists. looks like this. It's words, right? In this case, beginning at an iron rod set in the north line of the southwest four of the north, blah, 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 and this and that and the other, and aren't you glad it's not this that you have to deal with? Instead of this, it's probably going to be a reference to a recorded plat or a prior recorded deed. By following this thing, you would draw out the shape, or a surveyor would. And back in the day, another one is monuments. Monuments are part of meets and bounds too, because that's where the points are identified. A monument back in the old days might be a rock, a huge boulder, or a river, or a crossroads. But in these days, it's probably an iron bar driven down into the ground, not the wood stake with a flag on it. That signifies that there is an iron rod in the ground below it. But they drive it down so it's less likely to get removed unless it's some nosy, mean neighbor that wants to move the property line at midnight and he's out there trying to pull it up and move it over a few feet. True story. That has happened. But the monuments are another word that associates with meets and bounds. And then the government rectangular survey method is about townships and sections. It's about how a township is how many, it's divided into how many pieces. Not that many. Yeah, 36 total. And much more even than this, but it's 6 miles by 6 miles in perfect squares, starting here and ending here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, or 6, blah, 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 back and forth till we get to 36. So 6 miles by 6 miles is a township. What are the vertical lines called? We've got range lines and we've got tiers. Tiers are the horizontal. Range lines are the vertical. There are, the sections. So 36 sections. What's a section? What's the dimension of a section? No, it's one something, but not acre. There you go. Yeah, section is 1 mile by 1 mile. Because this is 36 sections in a township. So if a town is 6 miles by 6, then there's each of those blocks is a section. And the acres in a section are 640. And if the way we know that is a little bit of math. How big is a mile? How many linear feet? When you run a mile, you're going 5,280 feet. Not square feet, because a mile is not about like a shape. A mile is like going from this point to that point. It's a direction. How many miles before you get to your final exit toward home, right? 1 more mile, that means 5,280 more feet to go. And so if a section is 5,280 feet times 5,280 feet, that's a whole bunch of feet. 27 million. Almost 28 million. You don't have to worry about this. I'm just showing you why it's acres. What do we do when we get square feet and want to convert it to acres? We just divide it by the little old ladies. How many square feet are in an acre? 43,560. And so that's how we know that it's 640 acres in one section. If there's 640 acres in one section, how many acres are in a township? How many sections are in a township? 36 of them. Remember? 6 times 6. 23,040 acres in a township. The idea here is any town you go in is laid out pretty similarly, and the government section is in one of those northwest squares for every town, so that we know where to find the sheriff's office and the jail and the school building. Think about Little House on the Prairie or any of those old 1800s era shows, right? 1800s, late 1700s is when this all came about. It's when this was thought up. And that's why when you fly over it in the airplane, you look down, you see grids, because that's how they're laid out. What else? So basically it's knowing terminology, level 1. What else do you need? Well, you have time. Take it before. We'll do more of this on Wednesday. Take it before Wednesday and bring your questions. Then I'm looking at I don't think I'm allowed to actually show it to you, but I can relay it to you. But I'm looking at a document that they gave us, the commission, called Exam Problem Topics. And so it's showing statistically on the PSI results which topics gave people the most trouble. And so some of them are these. Half the candidates don't understand ad valorem property tax. So what do I mean by ad valorem property tax? What am I talking about there? That's a Latin term. Ad valorem means, what are we taxed on? The value of the property, at value. Ad valorem means at the value. And what else do we know about taxation? What is the legislation that spells out how we're going to handle property tax in North Carolina? It's a word that starts with M that doesn't immediately make you think about taxes when you read it. Makes you think about manufacturing, probably. And it's called the Machinery Act. That's something you could possibly see. The Machinery Act dictates what? They might say electronic signing. No, not true. That's the UETA, Uniform Electronic Transactions Act. What is it that dictates how property taxes work? That's the Machinery Act. The machinery, the workings of the taxation process. What is that process? Things like this. When can the tax rate change? How often can the tax rate, the property tax rate, change? It may not, but it could be changed annually. And when do you absolutely find out for sure what the rate is going to be for a given year? The rate is published every July. Good job. July is when that rate comes out, and it may not get changed for several years in a row. Oh, it's still the same rate. Every few years possibly, but probably not every year. Tax bill comes out when? Meaning as of this date, you can pay your taxes if you want to. September 1st, yeah. And you can pay it when without penalties or interest. Between September 1st all the way to December 31st. Yeah. All of that's within the Machinery Act. The Machinery Act is a thing that lays all this out. If you wanted to Google search North Carolina Machinery Act, you would see all this boring legal language that basically says these things. And I think you know about the math on it, but we used the annual interest version of this because they're so closely related. But with annual tax, how do we determine the dollars of annual tax? Well, there's always a rate on the bottom times the tax or assessed value. And in this case, that rate could be either in mills or dollars per $100. Just depends on the specific municipality as to which way they do it. We do it with the second one here in the Charlotte area. But I think in the middle part of the state, they still do mills. And we need to convert the rate into a decimal. So what do we divide mills by to convert that to the proper decimal for this calculation of tax dollars? Yeah, that gets divided by 1,000 because this one gets divided by 100. It says so in the name. And that's to get it turned into the right decimal so that you can multiply it by the tax value so that you can get the tax in dollars that's owed. Let's see. 60% of candidates don't understand the purpose, essential elements, and when to use various deed types or importance of recording. So the deed does get recorded. Essential elements of a deed. Who signs it? Who signs the deed? Only the seller, also known as the grantor. Good job. Not the buyer. Does the deed get recorded? Yeah. What if I sell Victor my house, sign the deed over to him, and I sell Sheena my house for the same price, sign the deed over to her, but she makes it to the courthouse and records first? Who's getting the house? Yeah, first to record. Who's coming after me with pitchforks? Victor. Legally, maybe physically, maybe both. I don't blame you. But in real life, the whole closing procedure is set up so that we can avoid that. But the attorney is kind of manipulating and facilitating the process, right? So as not to have that ugly situation. What's a general warranty deed compared to a special warranty deed? Which one is better? If you could say, I want this, not that. Seller says, here's your choice. It's usually not that. It's usually like, this is what I have to offer. But if you could have a choice, the general warranty deed is the best one because it has more guarantees built in. It says that that seller is going to stand behind that deed from the past, the present, and the future and do whatever they can to keep it, to clear it up if need be. If there's some other person that comes along and says, I own it, I own a portion of it, you didn't get my permission to buy it or to sell it, and therefore your ownership of it is in jeopardy. General warranty deed has 5 covenants or warranties involved. Special warranty deed only has 2. The big difference is the special warranty deed is just saying, as a seller, I'm only guaranteeing this thing for the time that I was the owner. I'm not standing behind its validity for the time that I wasn't the owner. That's what a general warranty deed does. So the names alone are kind of deceiving. You got to really know the stuff to understand which one's better because they're poorly named, I think. Quit claim deed is something that maybe when you're getting divorced, you're just signing the property over to the spouse that's going to keep it, Maybe you're buying them out, and so they sign that quitclaim deed over to you because they're no longer going to be the owner. And there's no guarantees with that. They're not saying, I don't stand behind anything except I'm the owner or have some ownership interest and I'm going to sign it over to you. It's not the same level as a general warranty deed. A sheriff's deed or a trustee's deed is something that could come up with regard to a legal action or a foreclosure. You might see something like that. And what is it that says deeds need to be recorded? I'll give you choices. The UETA, the RESPA, the Connor Act, or the Statute of Frauds. Yeah, Connor Act is about recording. You got it. Over half of candidates don't understand title searches and title insurance or possible title problems that are covered. How are we on title stuff? Do we get it? Who does the title search? In the transaction, who's doing it? The buyer agent, the listing agent, the attorney, or the lender? Yeah, the attorney. It's one of the many things the attorney's going to do. That attorney's going to go back in time, do a title search. How do they search it? Do they look in the MLS? No, but they do look in a database called the Grantor Grantee database. And it shows that this seller sold to this buyer, to sold to this buyer, to this buyer. And they need to go back how many years to comply with the Marketable Title Act. In other words, as long as they go back this amount of years, then it doesn't matter what happened before those years. It's going to be considered clean and clear title. Marketable Title Act says at least look back 30 years. Good job. Yeah. And then the attorney's doing this title search. They're looking up everything. Maybe they don't find anything bad that clouds the title. And they're gonna say to the title insurance company, it all checked out. From what I could tell, you're safe to issue a title insurance policy. And that title insurance company is going to say, okay, sounds good to us. We'll write the policy. That title insurance policy, if the buyer is getting a loan, how many title insurance policies will there be? Yes. Okay. I got you. Thanks for joining. We're recording it. It's still going to be rolling. So you'll catch whatever we keep going, however far we keep going. But I'll see you Wednesday, buddy. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Title insurance policies, if it's a loan, there's going to be two of them. And so one of them is going to be the seller's policy, and that's going to cover the value of the property because that's what the seller cares about. I mean the buyer. Sorry, the buyer's policy, the buyer cares about what it's worth. And they want that title insurance to cover up to the value of what it's worth. But the other one is the lender's policy. The lender only cares about how much of their money is involved in this. And so as every month goes by and we reduce the loan amount, the lender cares less and less until finally it hits zero. And there's no need for a lender policy. So there's an owner's policy and a lender's policy. Title insurance for both. Who pays for those? Who pays for the owner's policy and the lender's policy? Yeah, that buyer pays for them both. Anytime the lender has an expense, the buyer pays for it. Golden rule, he who has the gold makes the rules. Buy my stuff. If I'm going to loan you this money, then you got to pay for these various things. What's it called if the attorney finds out that there is a problem with the title. Maybe a third person who comes along and says, I actually own some stuff. Yeah, it's a clouded title. It's a cloud on the title. Needs to be cleared up, although it could still close with a cloud on it. It's just that, do you think the buyer's going to want to pay the same price if it's not a nice, crispy, clean title? No. They're going to probably want a discount because they're going to have to deal with that cloud. Either if they can never get it cleared up, they're going to have to sell this property with a clouded title and maybe have a smaller list of potential buyers who are willing to buy something with a clouded title. So therefore, they want to get a discount now when they buy it so that they can afford to take a cut for less money when they have to go to sell it, since it's a flawed, clouded title. 50% of candidates did not understand private land use controls. So the first thing we talked about with land use controls were zoning, like public ones. Public land use controls says the government can tell you what to do with your property and dictate setback lines. True story. My property, we're having trouble. They're wanting a certain setback line amount that's probably going to kill this sale. And the government won't let me change it to residential. And they're requiring 100 feet instead of 50 feet. And it makes this buyer not be able to use the property the way they want to. And this deal is probably falling apart. We were supposed to close next month because red tape. There's no good reason. What's behind us? Nothing. But eventually maybe townhouses and apartments if they can get the sewer hookups. But right now there's limited ones, so that may not even happen for years. But yet we are hamstrung because the government says we're not going to let you change to residential, and we're requiring this excessive setback amount just because it's in the rule book somewhere. But my buyer's not using it for manufacturing or anything like that. There's just store plumbing pipes. And I'm like, there's already trees to buffer you get it? I mean, that's what the government can do. They have the power. And I'm limited here to have to see a buyer go away. And now what do I have to sell? I'm going to meet with a zoning person on Monday to find out what can I do with this property. If I need to put it back on the market, I at least need to know what are our limitations with regard to this new development situation. So that's public land use controls, but there's also things that the individual owner, when they sell it, can put upon the property, private land use. And they can say, I'll sell it to you, but you got to follow these rules. We saw some of that early on when we talked about freehold estates with the fee simple defeasible type. And that's a seller putting conditions. You can't use it for this purpose, or you have to keep using it for that purpose. But this private land use control is more about, hey, I'm going to make a development, and anybody who ever buys or builds in this development has to comply with these rules. Are those conditions, covenants, and restrictions, which are known as private land use controls, CC&Rs, in other words, R's, private land use controls, how do we know what they are for a given neighborhood? How does that get revealed to the public? They're recorded, right? They get recorded. Connor Act says they have to be. We're in private land use controls here. What are some examples of private land use controls? What could they tell you that you can do with the property? If you want to buy in this neighborhood, it's got to be a single story. It's got to be at least 3,000 square feet. It's got to be all brick or stone. Whatever. It can be aesthetic. It can be size, type, acreage. I'll sell you this raw land of 100 acres to you, developer, but you can't carve it up into anything less than 2-acre parcels. And that developer would not like that. But if they want to buy it, they have to go along with that. They're going to now have to decide, well, I guess I won't be selling first-time homes giving people 2 acres. I want to price them to a point where it's worth me not being able to divide these 100 acres into as many pieces as I would like. They'd probably rather divide it up into like maybe even a fifth, 0.2, maybe even a sixth in the teens, cram more things in that they can sell, right? But if this is a private land use control that they have to comply with, then they might be building $1 million properties or something on the higher end to make it worth their while. So that's the gist of private land use controls. Almost 60% of candidates don't understand when environmental issues require disclosure. What environmental issues require disclosure? What about storage tanks? What constitutes an underground storage tank? How much of it needs to be underground before it's considered an underground storage tank? Not much. There's your hint. 10% even. Just as little as 10%, and it's considered a UST. And that has to be disclosed. If you as a broker know there is one, or if you think there could be one because of maybe the age of the property lends itself to the likelihood of an oil furnace. Was that oil stored in an underground storage tank? So look around. Look around the edges. See if you can find those pipes poking up out of the ground, and like the vent pipe and the fill pipe, and I don't know what I'm trying to draw here, but look around. It might be that seller dug into the ground and cut it off and tried to cover it up because their tank is still under there, rusting and leaking. That's the problem. What about lead-based paint? Do we as brokers have to get it tested for lead? No. Does the seller? No. But if the seller happened to get it tested for lead last year because they had some work done and the contractor had to do that before they did the work, then they need to share the findings. And what is it that triggers the possibility of this lead-based paint issue? Yeah, the age. And what's that year of house, year of built, that constitutes lead-based paint as a possibility in there somewhere? Almost. 78. If it's built before 78, then it might have lead-based paint under there somewhere. Odds are it's been painted over lots of times. But sometimes it's in such bad repair that it's peeling down to the wood. And if that's the case, then that potential first couple coats of lead base are revealed, coming out, maybe falling into the dirt, contaminating the dirt, maybe contaminating the drinking water, maybe getting crumbled up into dust and breathed in by little babies and old people. It's like the very young and the very old. That's a risk category. Asbestos. Do we have to disclose that it has asbestos? If we know. What if we don't know? Then no. But we do need to have enough knowledge to recognize red flags. Where does asbestos show up? What is made of it back before it was no longer made and used? Could be siding, could be ceiling tiles, could be flooring. It's a great product for fire retardants. Is that a word? It just happens to also cause cancer. Oopsie. Guess that ruined it for everybody. And so what are the two forms of remediation for asbestos? And also lead-based paint, by the way, same two. Either take it all out or cover it all up. Remediation is encapsulation or removal. Half the candidates don't understand how agency relationships are properly created. How are agency relationships properly created? Yeah, there you go. That's a good one. In writing. All agency agreements must be in writing. What about oral buyer agency? It doesn't get you paid. It's temporary. It only lasts halfway through, if that. At time of offer, it's got to be converted to writing. So good one. Huge. All agency agreements must be in writing. How do we explain to the potential client that we haven't locked down yet how agency works? What's that process when that first disclosure called? The W, working with agents disclosure. That's it. First step, tell them how you could work for them. And first step is tell them who you're working for right now. Then tell them, but I can work for you, and here's how this works. Here's what your choices are. The working with agents disclosure. When do we provide that disclosure to consumers? At what point in the process when we meet a new person? Yeah. Not initial, but first substantial contact. And that means what? What are we talking about in our conversation to signify first substantial contact? Yeah, there you go. Money and motivation. Real things, not just hi, my name is. What back to the lead-based paint, what's required of the broker and the seller when the property is built before 78? What are the documents required? Lead-based paint hazard addendum disclosure, right? The thing that says how all that works, and that spells out, has the seller had it tested? Oh no? Well then, does the buyer want to have it tested, or are they going to waive their right to test it? Which one? And if they're going to have it tested, they need to do it within the due diligence period. And there's even a place for the agent to sign saying, I told everybody what I was supposed to tell them. And in addition to that disclosure, there's one more document, and it's that little free PDF from the EPA called Protecting Your Family from Lead in the Home. So you have to provide both of those things. What if I'm writing an offer for my client and the client says, I want to go ahead and tell the seller that whatever the highest offer on the table is, I'll beat it by $5,000. And so we say, no problem. I have Word on my computer. I'll just write this up the way you want me to and call it Addendum Z, and we'll just attach it to our offer. And you go about using your creative writing degree and you write a 4-paragraph addendum from scratch. Are we okay? What would have been the better solution? If your client tells you they want to add in an addendum and it's not something that that exists, it's got to be made from scratch because it's something sort of unique. Yeah, that's the gist of it. Victor says we can't draft legal documents. Yeah, but who can? Not brokers, but best choice is an attorney. Second best choice is either of the parties could write it if they want to. The problem with that is they're not attorneys. They might think they're writing something nice and basic and covers all bases, but it doesn't. A lot of times sad to admit, much as we like to hate on attorneys sometimes, they do have a purpose. And because they turn a 1 page into a 5 page, it's probably because it covers all the bases. And sometimes you write one sentence and you think you're good, but you're like, oh, wait, I just opened myself up to all of these other possibilities. So advise them to have an attorney do it, but they could do it themselves. What if we're the listing agent and another agent calls us and says, hey, I love that new listing you've got. My buyer wants to make an offer, but they don't want to compete with multiple offers. Are there any other offers on the table? Can you answer that question? Yeah, you know that answer. It depends. What does it depend on? Whose permission do you need to answer that question in the affirmative? I gave you two choices, either the one who's got the highest offer on the table or the seller. We're talking about the question being, are there multiple offers? Whose permission do we need to answer the question, do we have multiple offers on the table? They're not asking what the highest one is. They're asking, are there more than one or any offers yet? The presence of multiple offers, that's the seller. That's for them to give permission. But if they're asking, what do I have to do to beat it? What's the best one that I need to beat? That would be getting permission from that one who has the highest one, and you'll never get it. Because I don't think anybody's that foolish. What happens if the buyer is 2 days after the due diligence deadline and realizes that the kind of financing they prefer isn't going to work, and so they want to walk away? They'd rather have a conventional loan, but they can't get qualified for that one. They can only get qualified for an FHA loan. And so they just want to just not buy it anymore. Could the seller say, well, you said you were going to buy it. I don't care what kind of loan you have to use. You still have to buy it. Or can the buyer walk for that reason or any reason? Or just because the sky turned green? Yeah. They are not held to being required to buy it. They can say, they don't have to say anything. They can say, never mind, just kidding. And they can walk, but they are going to lose that earnest money. What's the kind of loan that allows for a 3.5% down payment? Yeah, good job. That was quick. FHA loan. What kind of loan does not allow a prepayment penalty? Same, right? Same. FHA and VA loans are not allowed to have prepayment penalties. A conventional loan could, but not FHA or VA. So yeah, there's sort of, it's not like there's multiple possible answers there. What about the lowest possible qualifying ratios? Which kind of loan has the lowest qualifying ratios? Conventional, FHA, or VA? Requires that a smaller proportion of your monthly income goes toward principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Conventional is the one we studied that you actually have to be familiar with, the 2836. FHA, the back end, instead of 36, can go up to 43. So FHA and VA allow for a higher loan qualifying ratio. Which type of loan, if you have less than 20% down payment, requires that you get a private mortgage insurance policy? PMI instead of MIP. Which one is PMI? Conventional, FHA, or VA? That one's a little confusing. They're the same kind of product. It's just that they're called something different. So conventional loans are private mortgage insurance. FHA loans is a mortgage insurance premium. FHA loans are insured by the government. VA loans are guaranteed by the government. Typical down payments for conventional are 5%, but they could be less with your good enough credit. FHA's 3.5%. What's the minimum possible at VA down payment on a VA loan? You can go as little as even 0. Can a VA loan be assumed? Yeah. Can a VA loan be assumed by somebody that's not in the military? Yes, it actually can. It's just that now that vet can't use their VA entitlement because it's tied up by the loan assumption. So this random non-military citizen has assumed their loan, and so they've also tied up their entitlement amount. And until they refinance and get rid of that assumed loan, then the entitlement amount is freed back up for that veteran to use if they want to. What about if an advertisement says this? Quaint 3-bedroom, 2-bath home in the North Davidson district of Charlotte. Call Sheena at 555-555-5555 for more information. And you're the listing broker. Are we okay with that ad? All it said is call Sheena at this phone number. It didn't say in the ad that you're the broker. I might have been confusing about that. You're not the seller, you're the listing agent, and so you've got to admit that you're a broker. So we would have just run a blind ad because we didn't acknowledge and inform them that you're a... If it said call Sheena at ABC Realty, now we're good. Right? So no, the blind ad versus not a blind ad. And by the way, as a provisional broker, you have to take it a step further and also include the firm's phone number as well as your cell phone. You don't have to do your cell, but I would suggest it. But you definitely have to include the firm's number too. That's the biggest reason for me to say get rid of your provisional status ASAP. If you're going to run ads, you don't want other phone numbers besides the one that comes directly to you. What if the ad says quaint 3-bedroom bungalow, downtown Charlotte, walking distance to St. Thomas Catholic Church? I don't know if that's really a Catholic church, but it is in my world. Do we have a problem? Yeah, we violated fair housing. In walking distance to the YMCA or the Jewish Community Center. Now we got religion in the mix again. So no for proper ad writing, blind ads versus fair housing violations. What are the 4 kinds of eviction that we talked about? What's the one that we all think of when we think eviction because the tenant they stayed in the property after they were supposed to leave? Their 12 months is over. They're supposed to move out, but they didn't move out and they're not paying rent. Yeah. And it's not actually got the word eviction in it. It's called summary ejectment. Can that landlord bully them and take the door off and turn the heat up in the summer, even if they're there when they're not supposed to be? No, they've got to follow this judicial process of summary ejectment. If they were to try to turn off utilities or take off doors or lock doors, padlock things, that would be self-help eviction. And that's not allowed. It's illegal. If they don't keep the property safe, and so therefore the tenant says, I can't live here anymore, I'm moving out, even though it's only 6 months into my year lease, and I'm not going to pay rent anymore, that's called what? What kind of eviction is that? The tenant evicts themselves due to a safety issue that hasn't gotten resolved. I'll give you choices. Summary ejectment, self-help eviction, or constructive eviction. And that one is constructive eviction. Yeah, good job. And then retaliatory eviction is when the tenant exercises their rights and the landlord gets mad about it and tries to evict them over it. Those are the 4 kinds. Notice that only one of them is with the tenant being the bad guy. The other 3 are the landlord misbehaving. 70% of candidates don't understand the landlord's responsibility regarding tenant security deposits in the final accounting days. So we are finished with the lease. End of the lease has come and gone. How many days does the landlord have to provide the tenant or the now ex-tenant a preliminary accounting showing what they're going to keep from the security deposit, if anything? Yeah, 30 days. 30 days for the preliminary one. What about the final one? When they say, yeah, okay, I'm going to take 200 and I'm going to give you the rest. 60. You got it. 60 for the final one, 30 for the preliminary one. Good job. What if your grandma owns a duplex and lets you live in one side of it for free rent? In exchange, you keep the other side in control and keep tenants in there and collect the rent and pass it on off to her. And you do not have a license to practice real estate. Is this okay? Yeah. You're doing real estate without a license. What if it's a duplex that belongs to you, not your grandma? You live in half of it and you rent the other. Now you don't need a license because it's yours. What if it's a duplex that belongs to you and you live in one half of it and you turn down somebody from renting the other side because of their protected class? Is that allowed as a federal exemption? Your property, your multifamily property, if you, the owner, live in part of it, in fact, that is an exemption. You can choose to not rent it out to someone because of a protected class. That is one of the federal exemptions. What about on the state level, North Carolina? That's also an exemption. That too is an exemption. And what if instead of you living there, it's your college daughter and she lives in one half as your relative? Can you say, I don't want so-and-so from this protected class to live in the other half of this duplex? Yes. In North Carolina, that is also an exemption. Either you, the owner, or a relative of you live in one of those units, you can choose to not rent to somebody who's in a protected class that you don't want them to be there. Don't forget those exemptions. As horrible as they sound, they exist. There's a couple more. We'll go into those on Wednesday. Anybody have anything else? If you haven't taken all of the tests, he won't let you sit for this Thursday test until you finished all of those practice exams. So go ahead and get them knocked out. Also, because Wednesday will go better, right, for you. And I'm probably preaching to the choir here. I probably should be telling people who aren't here right now. But I don't have that list, but he does, and I guarantee there's probably at least 2 or 3 that haven't done any of them yet. I don't know why people do it that way, but by now you should have done most of them. So bring me your questions. Let me know in between now and then. I don't mind. Text me, email me, whatever, and I'll help you out as you're going through some things. And I've made little video snippets, and I'll post it, and so everybody benefits. But I'll let you know I made this explainer thing. Sometimes I vocal audio recorded, or maybe video, or just write out something. So use me as a resource. Happy to do it. If you want more reps with test taking, it's not too late to, if you want to do the Learn, Test, Pass thing. It's like $50 for 90 days, I think. And I would just take the heck out of a whole bunch of practice questions between now and then. And that obviously would extend to the PSI, right? So just because it's not that you would only be getting the good out of it for the class exam, you could keep using it to prepare for PSI. So that's probably your best application of knowledge at this point, is just more and more, because if you're feeling like the tests are worded tricky, the only way to get better prepared for that is to get more familiar with them, and that's just more repetitions. Yeah. Yeah, I think the one time is okay. Yeah. I'll confirm that, let you know, but I'm pretty sure it's just giving you the option. With that, have a great rest of the weekend. Let me know what I can do to help you, and I'll see you on Wednesday. You too.